She poured something in my drink, then smiled like it was nothing. I switched our glasses before she sat back down. She sipped, just a taste, and minutes later her face went white. But while she staggered upstairs clutching her stomach, I stayed calm. I waited until she slept like a corpse, and found the divorce papers in her purse, claiming I was mentally unstable. If I'd taken that drink, she'd have owned everything. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I set traps. Because if she wants to ruin my life in court, I'll let her walk in first, right into her own lies. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I'm 45 years old. I run my company from a glass-walled office downtown, built from nothing into something my competitors quietly envy. My wife Sarah watches me from across our marble kitchen counter each morning, her smile never quite reaching her eyes these days. My father Thomas, gone 5 years now, taught me to keep detailed records of everything, a habit that served me well. The morning light catches the brass clock on my desk, a gift from my business partner James Chen, marking another day of carefully maintained order. Even at church, where my wife and I sit shoulder to shoulder in the third pew, I feel that familiar tension coiling beneath our polite exchanges. I track every schedule, message, and deal with the same precision Dad once used to measure twice before cutting. But let me start from the beginning. It started on a Tuesday evening in September, the kind where autumn's first chill sneaks through window frames. Sarah and I were having dinner like we'd done 1,000 times before. Roast chicken, asparagus, the good china we got as wedding gifts 20 years ago. The overhead light caught the crystal glasses just right, making shadows dance across our cream tablecloth while we talked about work. The new warehouse deal looks promising, I said, reviewing inventory numbers from memory. Jenkins finally signed off on the expansion. I kept my tone even, the way I always did during these conversations. You know how it goes, keeping things professional, even at home. Sarah nodded, her fingers drumming lightly against the tablecloth. That's wonderful, dear. She stood up, heading to the cart we'd placed near the dining room window. The wheels squeaked slightly. I'd been meaning to oil them for weeks. Now, I've always been observant. Dad taught me that success lies in the details, and over 20 years of building my business, I'd learned to spot when something was off. Maybe that's why I noticed the slight tremor in Sarah's hands as she reached for the whiskey decanter. Her shoulders were tight, too tight for a casual pour. She held my glass with both hands, like she was performing surgery instead of fixing a drink. That's when I saw it. A small vial, no bigger than her pinky, appearing from nowhere. The neck caught the light for just a split second before she tipped it over my glass. Have you ever felt time slow down? Like you're watching a movie frame by frame? I saw that thin stream of liquid disappear into the whiskey, bubbles rising and popping as it mixed in. My spine went cold, but 20 years of business negotiations had taught me to keep my face neutral, my hands steady on my fork. Could you grab the salt, honey? I asked, my voice as casual as if I were commenting on the weather. The asparagus needs a little something. She turned toward the kitchen, and I moved. Quick, silent, efficient. I switched our glasses, the crystal making no sound against the tablecloth. When she returned, everything looked exactly the same. Sarah sat down, lifted her glass, my glass now, and took a small sip. I watched her throat work as she swallowed, her lipstick leaving a perfect crescent on the rim. Within minutes, her face went pale. A sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead. I'm not feeling well, she said, her voice tight. I think I need to lie down. Her chair scraped against the hardwood as she stood, one hand pressed against her stomach. Of course, I replied, still playing the concerned husband. Should I bring you some ginger ale? She shook her head, already hurrying toward the stairs. No, I just need to rest. I sat there alone in our dining room, listening to the kitchen clock tick. Each second seemed to echo off the walls. The chicken grew cold on my plate while I replayed every detail. The vial's glint, her trembling hands, the way she'd positioned herself to block my view of the pour. You might wonder why I didn't confront her right then. But here's something else my father taught me. Never show your cards until you know the whole game. A confrontation without proof would just give her a chance to cry, deny, make me look paranoid. No, I needed to be smart about this. So I did what I always did. I cleaned up. Scraped the plates, loaded the dishwasher, wiped down the table. My hands moved through these familiar motions while my mind turned over one question again and again. What exactly had my wife of 20 years tried to make me drink? I waited in my home office until the house settled into that particular kind of quiet you only notice after midnight. You know the kind, when even the walls seem to be holding their breath. Sarah's sleep medication usually kicked in around 11, and I'd learned her breathing patterns over 2 decades of marriage. Slow, steady inhales, regular exhales, the rhythm of someone who thought they were winning. The hallway carpet muffled my steps as I made my way downstairs. Sarah's designer purse sat exactly where she'd left it, perched on the entryway table, next to her car keys, and that little ceramic dish where we kept spare change. The leather was soft under my fingers as I lifted it, careful not to let the metal clasp click. Remember when I mentioned being detail-oriented? That's not just about business. I took a mental snapshot of everything. The angle of the purse strap, the way her wallet peeked out, even which direction the zipper pull faced. These little things matter when you're dealing with someone who tried to poison you over dinner. The dining room seemed different now, darker, more hostile. That fancy crystal decanter caught what little moonlight filtered through the windows, and I couldn't help thinking about what might have been mixed into my drink. I settled at the table, positioning myself under the soft glow of the security nightlight we kept on for guests. Inside her purse, everything was organized with military precision. Sarah had always been methodical. It's one of the things that attracted me to her in the first place. Funny how traits you once admired can turn threatening. I found the papers tucked into a manila folder, crisp and clean like they'd just come from a lawyer's printer. My hands didn't shake as I unfolded the first page. They should have, probably. But years of signing contracts had taught me to stay steady even when the stakes were high. And these stakes? They were higher than any business deal I'd ever faced. The words hit like body blows. Petition for dissolution of marriage, division of assets, mental competency, evaluation. Each paragraph was a carefully constructed blade, designed to cut away everything I'd built over 20 years. The numbers made my throat tight. She wanted the house, the cars, access to all accounts, but it was the company shares that showed the real plan. She wasn't just leaving me, she was trying to take my life's work. Then I saw it, buried in the legal language like a snake in tall grass. The petitioner cites concerns regarding the respondent's mental stability and decision-making capacity. Another page detailed recent erratic behavior and concerning patterns. All lies, but crafted to sound just plausible enough to a judge who didn't know me. Have you ever felt your world shift sideways? Like gravity suddenly changed direction. The life insurance policy writer was the final piece, updated last month to list her as sole beneficiary, with a payout that would let her buy out my partners if something unfortunate happened to me. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, its steady drone helping me focus. I used my phone to photograph each page, making sure to capture every detail, every signature, every date. Then I reassembled the package exactly as I'd found it, aligning each corner, smoothing each fold. The purse went back on the entryway table, positioned precisely where it had been. I even adjusted the nearby chair 2 degrees to match the original angle. Details matter when you're dancing with someone who plans to destroy you. Standing there in the dark, I forced myself to breathe slowly through the pressure building in my chest. Running upstairs to confront her would feel good for about 10 seconds. Then she'd cry, call someone, claim I was having an episode, and everything in those papers would start to look true to outsiders. No, I needed more than suspicion and legal documents. I needed proof that would stand up in court. Proof that would show exactly who was unstable and who was defending themselves. One wrong move now would hand her everything she wanted. I touched my throat, remembering that drink she'd poured just hours ago. The game had changed from a simple betrayal to something much darker. Sarah wasn't just planning to leave me. She was orchestrating my complete destruction, piece by carefully planned piece. Morning hit like a slap of cold water. I'd gotten maybe 2 hours of sleep, but my alarm still went off at 5:30 sharp. You know what they say about habits? They're either your best friend or your worst enemy. That morning, routine was the only friend I could trust. I went through my normal motions. Workout clothes, 30 minutes on the treadmill, shower, dress, every step exactly as I'd done it for years. The coffee maker gurgled right on schedule, filling the kitchen with that rich aroma that usually meant comfort. Now it just meant showtime. Sarah came down at 7, same as always. She was wearing that blue blouse she saves for client meetings, hair pulled back neat and professional. "Morning, honey," she said, voice warm as fresh toast. "Sleep well?" "Like a rock," I lied, matching her tone while I poured her coffee. 2 sugars, splash of cream, the way she likes it. Her fingers brushed mine as she took the mug, and I had to fight not to flinch. Instead, I watched her sip, noting how her eyes flicked to my face over the rim, checking for, what? Signs of whatever she'd tried to slip me last night? "Big day at the office?" I asked, keeping it light. "Oh, you know how it is with the Richardson account." She smiled, all teeth in practice. Their quarterly review always needs extra attention. I nodded, pretending to check my phone while actually watching her movements. The way she leaned against the counter, casual but calculated. How she touched my arm when walking past, gentle, testing. Every gesture felt rehearsed now, like a performance I was finally seeing clearly. I might be late tonight, I told her. Quarter-end reports need reviewing. A convenient truth. I did have reports to review, but they weren't why I needed the extra time. Don't work too hard, she said. And for a second, I caught something in her expression. Concern? No. Calculation. She was mapping my schedule, just like I was mapping her tells. At the office, I kept up appearances. Signed contracts, returned calls, approved budgets. Business as usual on the surface. But between meetings, I was making lists in a password-protected file on my personal laptop. Spaces to monitor. Equipment needed. Time windows. I moved 3 afternoon meetings to morning slots, citing client preferences. That would give me time to set up surveillance without rushing. Rushing gets you caught, and I couldn't afford mistakes. One slip, one confrontation without solid evidence, and I'd be playing right into her hands. My father's voice echoed in my head. In business and in life, son, timing beats speed every time. He'd been talking about contract, negotiations, but the principle fit. I needed to be thorough, not fast. Between calls, I jotted everything down on my yellow legal pad, the kind I've used for 20 years of business planning. Only this time, I was planning something very different. At the bottom of the page, I wrote one line and underlined it twice. Prove intent without tipping Sarah. You might wonder why I didn't just confront her. Demand answers about the drink, the divorce, papers, all of it. But think about it. What would that get me? She'd deny everything. Cry, maybe call her brother or a friend. Daniel's acting paranoid, she'd say. I'm worried about him. And suddenly, those claims about mental instability in her divorce papers wouldn't seem so far-fetched. No, I needed hard evidence. The kind that speaks for itself in court. That turns sympathetic looks into shocked understanding. Because this wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about protecting everything I'd spent my life building. I closed my laptop as the sun started setting behind the office buildings. Time to head home and act normal, whatever that meant now. One day down, I thought. How many more until I had what I needed? The next evening, I pulled into the driveway at 6:30, right on schedule. Sarah's yoga class wouldn't end for another hour. Perfect timing for what I needed to do. I hauled in a toolbox and my laptop, just like any other maintenance night. We'd had some electrical issues last month, so a guy checking wiring wouldn't raise eyebrows with the neighbors. Evening, Dan, called Mrs. Peterson from next door. She was watering her hydrangeas like clockwork. Hey there. Just some routine checks tonight. I held up the toolbox with an easy smile. Amazing how normal you can sound when your heart's doing overtime. Inside, I got to work. You know those tiny cameras they use for home security now? I'd picked up half a dozen. Wireless, motion-activated, and small enough to hide in plain sight. But here's the thing about surveillance. It's not just about having cameras. It's about having the right angles, the right lighting, and most importantly, proof that'll hold up in court. I started in the kitchen. That's where she'd tried it the first time, so odds were good she'd try again. I mapped out the critical zones. The drink station where we keep the glasses. The cabinet with the liquor. The counter where she'd stood when she, well, you know. Each spot needed coverage without shadows or blind spots. Think like a prosecutor, I muttered, testing angles. I poured water into a glass, watching through my phone's preview screen. Could you see the liquid? The hand movement? The glass itself? I adjusted until everything was crystal clear. No judge could question what they were seeing. The home office came next. That's where Sarah handled most of our paperwork. Bills, insurance forms, everything that could become evidence. I placed one camera with a clear view of the desk, another covering the filing cabinet. Then I ran through the motions, opening drawers, shuffling papers, making phone calls. Each action needed to be visible without question. The hallway between the kitchen and office was trickier. Too wide an angle would waste storage on empty space. Too narrow might miss something crucial. I settled for a compromise. One camera focused on the transition point where someone would naturally pause while walking between rooms. That's where hands shift, where vials might appear or disappear. You might wonder if I felt bad about this, setting up cameras in my own home. Truth is, I did. 20 years of marriage, and here I was treating our house like a crime scene. But then, I remembered that little vial over my glass, and my conscience took a back seat to survival. I tested the whole system twice, Each camera uploaded to a secure cloud account I'd set up under a business name. Timestamps synced across all devices, crucial for establishing sequence of events. I even recorded myself walking through normal evening routines as a baseline. Everything had to be documented, organized, and most importantly, admissible. The real challenge was hiding the cameras without actually hiding them. Sounds contradictory, right? But legally, you can't record in places with an expectation of privacy without notification. So each camera had to be technically visible, if you knew where to look, while being subtle enough not to draw attention. By 11:30, I had 6 silent witnesses positioned throughout the house, each one ready to catch what I couldn't prove with words alone. I did one final check of the feeds on my laptop. Kitchen, clear. Office, clear. Hallway, clear. Time stamps running. Upload working. The house felt different now. Every room had eyes. Every corner held secrets. But as I locked up for the night, watching that first red recording light blink in the darkness, I felt something close to peace. Tomorrow would bring what it brought, but at least now I'd have proof. Standing in the kitchen doorway, I looked at the camera tucked above the cabinet, barely visible unless you knew it was there. Just like Sarah's plans had been, until now. Let the camera see what words cannot, I thought. Then I killed the lights and headed upstairs, leaving my silent guardians to their watch. The next morning, I kept everything normal. Made coffee at 6:15, kissed Sarah goodbye at 7, and drove to work like I'd done thousands of times before. Amazing how routine can feel like armor when your world's falling apart. Throughout the day, I caught myself checking my phone more than usual. Each notification made my stomach tighten, but I forced myself to wait. Watching the feeds in real time would have driven me crazy. And besides, I needed to focus on work. Keep up appearances, you know. By the time I got home that evening, Sarah had already eaten and was feeling tired. Her new favorite excuse lately. I reheated some leftovers, settled in my home office with my laptop, and finally opened the security feeds. The kitchen footage started quiet enough. Sarah making coffee, checking her phone. Then she made a call. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the camera's audio picked up everything crystal clear. Yes, I understand. No, he doesn't suspect anything. She nodded along like a student taking notes. The papers are ready. We just need to time this right. Ever had one of those moments where reality shifts under your feet? That's what it felt like. Watching my wife take instructions from someone about how to destroy me. But that wasn't even the worst part. Around 2 in the afternoon, the office camera caught movement. The door opened, and in walked Tommy, Sarah's brother, the same guy I'd helped out 3 years ago when his contracting business went under. He'd shown up with some excuse about dropping off mail that had gone to their mom's house. Tommy moved around my office like he owned the place, checking drawers, examining papers on my desk. Then Sarah joined him, and that's when the real show started. Everything's set up exactly like we discussed, Tommy said, his voice carrying that same confident tone he'd used when pitching me his failed business plans. The mentally unstable angle is perfect. Who's gonna believe the gullible provider over his concerned wife? I had to pause the footage. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the controls. Gullible provider. That's what they called me. The guy who'd built everything from nothing. Who'd bailed out Tommy when he couldn't make payroll. Who'd trusted. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Just like my old man taught me. When my wrists stopped trembling, I rewound the footage and watched it again. This time, I paid attention to details. The way Tommy gestured like a foreman laying out plans. How Sarah's head bobbed in agreement. The casual way they discussed ruining my life. Remember those old cop shows where they'd enhance security footage until it was crystal clear? Well, these cameras were already that good. I could see every smirk, every knowing look between them. I started making notes, matching timestamps with actions. 2:14 p.m. Tommy enters office 2:17 p.m. Examines desk contents. 2:22 p.m. Sarah joins. Discussion begins 2:25 p.m. Gullible provider, comment. 2:31 p.m. Reviews timeline for divorce filing. The whole thing felt surreal, like watching a movie about strangers who happened to look like people I knew. Except this was real. And these people were plotting to take everything I'd spent 20 years building. I worked methodically, creating multiple copies of the footage. One set went to an encrypted cloud drive. Another to a USB stick I'd keep in my office safe. The third copy, that one I drove across town and locked in a safety deposit box at a bank where Sarah had never set foot. You know what really got to me? Not just the, betrayal, though that cut deep enough. It was realizing this wasn't some desperate act by my wife alone. This was a coordinated attack, planned out like one of Tommy's construction projects. Only instead of building something, they were trying to tear my life down to the foundation. The next morning hit different. You ever walk into a room where everything looks normal, but something feels off? That's how my office felt when I unlocked the door at 6:30 a.m. Same desk, same filing cabinets, same view of the parking lot filling up with early arrivals. But now I knew those walls had witnessed a conspiracy. I buried myself in paperwork, trying to keep my mind focused on the numbers that had always made sense to me. Around 10, Mike, my business partner of 15 years, knocked on my doorframe. We had our usual Tuesday meeting scheduled to review contracts. "Got a minute, Dan?" His voice had that careful tone people use when they're carrying bad news. "Sure, come on in." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the one where I'd watched Tommy sit just yesterday in the security footage. Mike settled in, shuffling some papers without really looking at them. I'd known him long enough to read his tells. The way he adjusted his tie 3 times in 30 seconds, how his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "These supplier contracts look solid," he started, but I could tell that wasn't what he'd come to discuss. "Listen, Dan, something happened last week that I think you should know about." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "Go ahead." He leaned forward, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "Sarah's lawyer reached out to me, called it a courtesy consultation about the company's future stability." Mike's fingers drummed once on his knee. They wanted to discuss transferring your shares. Said it would be better for everyone if we planned ahead for inevitable changes. Ever had sandpaper dragged across your skin? That's how those words felt. The betrayal I'd discovered at home had already slithered its way into my workplace, trying to poison the one partnership I thought was still solid. "What did you tell them?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Told them I don't discuss company business with outside lawyers without proper authorization." Mike's shoulders straightened a bit. "Dan, we've built this place together for 15 years. I wouldn't." "I know, and I did know." Mike had stood beside me through every hard call, every late night, every risk we'd taken to grow this company. "I appreciate you telling me. Would you mind writing down when they contacted you? Time, date, what was said? Just in case." He nodded, already pulling out his phone to check his call log. "They reached out last Thursday, 2:15 p.m. I've still got the voicemail." While Mike wrote his statement, I glanced at my desk calendar. The divorce hearing date stared back at me, circled in harsh black ink. 3 weeks, 21 days, until I had to walk into that courtroom and fight for everything I'd built. The math was brutal. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. They were going after the company's banking relationships, supplier contracts, client confidence, the invisible framework that kept 20 years of work standing strong. One wrong move, one emotional outburst, and it could all collapse like a house with its foundation cut away. After Mike left, I sat there staring at that circled date. 3 weeks to protect my life's work. 3 weeks to stop them from turning my own company against me. 3 weeks to make sure my legacy didn't become someone else's victory story. I got up and closed my office door quietly. Standing there in the empty room, surrounded by the certificates and awards we'd earned over the years, I whispered a promise to myself. Not 1 inch without evidence. The countdown had begun, and I couldn't afford to waste a single day. Next morning, I sat in my car outside Mel's diner at 7 a.m. sharp, watching steam rise from the kitchen vents into the cold air. The place hadn't changed since the 80s. Same faded sign, same worn booths, same coffee that could wake the dead. Perfect for a conversation that needed privacy without pretense. Frank was already inside, tucked into a corner booth with 2 mugs and a legal pad in front of him. I'd never worked with him directly, but I remembered how he'd helped Tom Wheeler keep his manufacturing plant during that nasty corporate takeover 3 years back. Frank had this reputation for turning impossible situations inside out. "Daniel." He stood to shake my hand, his grip firm despite being well into his 70s. "Coffee's hot, crowd's thin, let's talk. You know those moments when you're about to share something heavy, and your throat tries to close up? That's how it felt sliding into that booth. But I'd learned the hard way that secrets are just weapons you hand to your enemies. So I started from the beginning. The dinner, the vial, the glass switch. I described finding those divorce papers, then discovering Tommy's involvement through the security footage. When I got to Mike's warning about Sarah's lawyer trying to grab my shares, Frank's pen moved steadily across his yellow pad, never breaking rhythm. The diner's morning clatter faded into background noise as I laid out every detail. Frank didn't interrupt once, just nodded, wrote, and occasionally tapped his pen when something caught his attention. His eyes stayed sharp behind those old-school reading glasses, like he was assembling pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite see. When I finished, he set down his pen and took a long sip of coffee. The silence stretched until I almost broke it. But something in his expression told me to wait. Finally, he looked up with this slight smile that reminded me of my father. "If they want to bury you," he said, "let them dig their own grave first." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Right now, they think they're writing the story. Your wife plays the concerned spouse, her brother backs up her claims about your instability, and that lawyer tries to convince everyone the company needs new leadership." He leaned forward. "So let them tell their story. Let them present their evidence. Let them swear to their version of events." The light bulb clicked on. "And then show the proof that they lied." "Exactly." Frank pulled out a fresh legal pad. "But it has to be bulletproof. Every video needs clear timestamps. Every file needs a documented chain of custody. Every affidavit needs proper notarization. We're not just gathering evidence. We're building a wall they'll break themselves against." Something shifted in my chest as he spoke. That knot of shame and anger loosened, replaced by a familiar feeling. The same focused determination that had helped me build my company from scratch. "No emotional outbursts," Frank continued, writing as he talked. "No confrontations. No hints that you know anything. Just document, verify, and wait." I glanced at his notes. He'd outlined a detailed timeline for securing and authenticating the evidence. "How do we protect the video files? Multiple backups, stored in different locations. I know a digital forensics expert who can verify the timestamps and metadata. We'll need clean copies for court and backups in case anything mysteriously disappears." For the next hour, we mapped out every step. Frank's experience showed in the details. Things I would have missed about proper documentation and legal procedures. By the time we finished our third cup of coffee, I had pages of specific actions, not just general advice. Standing to leave, I felt different. My spine was straight again, my shoulders set. This wasn't about wounded pride anymore. It was about executing a plan with the same precision I'd used to build my business. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. "Get those files secured today. I'll start the paperwork for the affidavits. Remember? Let them think they're winning right up until they lose." I spent the next 6 hours making secure copies of every video file, creating detailed logs of every recording, and arranging for a notary to document the whole process. Each step felt like laying another brick in a foundation, not for revenge, but for justice. 7 days. That's what stood between me and the moment that would decide everything I'd built over 20 years. You'd think time would drag, but it flew by like paper in a storm while I pieced together the evidence. Ever organize your whole life into 15-minute video segments? Let me tell you, it's a strange thing. There I was in my home office at midnight, mapping out every crucial moment like some kind of twisted documentary editor. The vial entering the glass, Sarah's careful movements, the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. It all had to be crystal clear, even to a stranger. "No dramatic music needed here," I muttered to myself, labeling another clip. "The truth's dramatic enough." I split the footage into 3 categories, just like Frank suggested. Foundation. The normal routines, showing how Sarah and I typically moved through the house. Then the acts themselves, each instance of tampering, caught from multiple angles. Finally, the motive. Those damning conversations with Tommy. The paperwork. The timeline that showed this wasn't some sudden decision, but a calculated plan. You know what's funny? When you're reviewing security footage of your own life falling apart, you start noticing the smallest details. Like how Sarah always checked her phone exactly 3 minutes after any conversation with Tommy. Or how she'd adjust her wedding ring whenever she lied. A tell I'd somehow missed for years. I'd rehearse my testimony in the shower, of all places. At approximately 7:15 p.m. I observed, no emotions, no accusations, just facts. Frank had drilled that into me. Let the evidence do the heavy lifting. You're just the narrator. Speaking of Frank, he'd stop by each evening to review our presentation order. "We start with the routine footage," he'd say, tapping his legal pad. "Show the court what normal looked like. Then we hit them with the first tampered drink. Build the foundation before you show the cracks." The night before court, sleep came in scattered chunks. Every 90 minutes, I'd jolt awake, convinced I needed to check the drives one more time. The third time it happened, I actually laughed at myself. A short, sharp sound in the dark. "The files aren't going anywhere, Daniel," I told myself. "They're backed up in 3 different places." Morning arrived with its own kind of mercy. I chose my plainest navy suit, the one I wore for serious client meetings. No power ties or fancy cufflinks, just clean lines and proper fit. "You're not there to impress anyone," Frank had advised. "You're there to tell the truth." The courthouse corridor felt longer than usual, each step echoing against marble floors that had seen thousands of similar walks. A young couple passed by, holding hands, and I remembered Sarah and I doing the same thing when we filed our marriage license. Funny how life circles back sometimes, isn't it? I checked my phone one last time. 8:47 a.m. The thumb drive in my pocket felt heavier than its actual weight, like it was made of lead instead of plastic. Each video file on it was time-stamped, authenticated, and organized into folders that even a tech-challenged judge could navigate. "You ready?" Frank appeared beside me, his briefcase worn but professional. I nodded, running through our sequence one final time in my head. Foundation, act, motive. Simple as that. The bailiff's voice carried down the hallway. Case number 2023, CV 4891, Mercer versus Mercer. Through the courtroom doors, I spotted Sarah sitting at her table, wearing the cream-colored blazer she'd bought for charity functions. Her lawyer stood beside her, adjusting his tie with that particular smile lawyers save for when they think they've already won. My hand found the presentation remote in my pocket, its smooth surface cool against my palm. The projection screen loomed blank and white behind the judge's bench, waiting for its cue. I took my seat next to Frank, breathing steady and slow. 20 years of business had taught me that the moment before a major presentation is no time for last-minute changes. You prepare, you check, you execute. The bailiff's voice rang out again. "All rise." The courtroom had that peculiar hush you only get when everyone's waiting for someone else to speak first. Sarah's lawyer, Gerald Matthews, stood up like he was accepting an award, tugging his silk tie into perfect position. "Your Honor," he began, "this case presents a deeply concerning situation." His voice carried that practiced mix of concern and authority that probably worked wonders at cocktail parties. "Mr. Mercer has become increasingly paranoid and erratic over the past year, exhibiting controlling behaviors that threaten not only his marriage but the stability of his business operations." I kept my face neutral, just like Frank and I had practiced. "You ever notice how hard it is to keep still when someone's lying about you?" My fingers wanted to drum against the table, but I kept them flat. "Mrs. Mercer has documented numerous instances of obsessive behavior," Matthews continued, flipping through a stack of papers with theatrical precision. "Mr. Mercer insists on reviewing security footage daily, maintains excessive records of mundane household activities, and demonstrates an unhealthy fixation with controlling every aspect of their shared life." From the corner of my eye, I caught Sarah nodding along, her hands clasped demurely in her lap. She'd worn her pearl necklace today, the one I'd given her on our 10th anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. "For example, Your Honor," Matthews warmed to his theme, "Mr. Mercer requires all household expenses to be logged in detailed spreadsheets. He monitors Mrs. Mercer's comings and goings through a shared calendar system he insisted upon installing." He paused for effect. "What began as apparent business acumen has devolved into paranoid surveillance of his own family. Remember when you were a kid and someone would tell your parents a completely twisted version of what actually happened? That's exactly how this felt. Every routine I'd developed to build and protect our life together was being repackaged as evidence against me. Furthermore," Matthews continued, "Mr. Mercer's behavior has become increasingly erratic at work. He's moved meetings without explanation, installed additional security measures without consulting the board, and demonstrated increasing suspicion toward long-term business partners." The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-rimmed glasses, maintained a poker face that would have won her millions in Vegas. But I noticed her pen tapping faster every time Matthews used the word unstable, which he managed to work in about every third sentence. "Your Honor," he said, warming up for his big finish, "Mrs. Mercer comes before this court seeking protection, not just of her financial interests, but of her personal safety and well-being." He gestured toward Sarah, who dabbed at her eyes with a tissue I hadn't seen her pull out. "She's watched the man she loved transform into someone who views every interaction through a lens of suspicion and control." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Matthews, regarding the financial oversight you mentioned, are there specific instances where Mr. Mercer's behavior has impacted business operations?" Matthews laughed, that practiced, comfortable chuckle that's supposed to make everyone feel like they're in on the joke. "Your Honor, just last month, Mr. Mercer insisted on personally reviewing every security camera in the building, claiming there were blind spots that needed addressing. This caused significant disruption to normal operations and concerned several key clients. I thought about the real reason for those camera checks, the footage now waiting on the thumb drive in my pocket. Sometimes the best response is just to let people keep talking. The judge made a note, her pen scratching against the legal pad. The sound seemed louder than it should have in the quiet courtroom. Finally, she looked up, her gaze shifting to our table. Mr. Mercer, do you have a response to these allegations? I stood slowly, the remote control solid and cool in my palm. Frank gave me the slightest nod. We'd prepared for exactly this moment. Yes, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I'd like to present video exhibits, all with synchronized timestamps that can be verified by independent experts. The air in the courtroom seemed to thin. Sarah's hand twitched toward her purse, and Matthew's smile flickered just slightly at the edges. I heard the soft whir of the projection screen lowering behind the judge's bench. You may proceed, Mr. Mercer, the judge said, adjusting her glasses. I raised the remote, my fingers steady on the play button. The screen flickered to life, and the familiar hum of the courtroom's audio system filled the silence. I pressed play, and the first image filled the screen. Our kitchen, 3 weeks ago, filmed from the angle that caught the island and sink in crisp detail. The timestamp glowed steady in the corner. 7:42 p.m. You know that moment when you're showing someone evidence, and you suddenly worry if what's crystal clear to you will be clear to them? That knot tightened in my stomach until Sarah's hand entered the frame, holding that small vial over my glass. The liquid stream caught the kitchen light, looking almost beautiful as it disappeared into the carbonation. I hit pause right as the last drop fell, freezing the frame where you could see both the vial and her face in perfect focus. Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice steady. This was recorded during our regular evening routine. I've provided receipts for the security system's installation, maintenance logs, and verification of timestamp integrity. The murmuring started small, like a breeze through dry leaves. Sarah's lawyer shifted in his chair, his earlier confidence cracking around the edges. I advanced to the second clip. This was recorded 2 days later. Same kitchen, 2:15 p.m. Her brother Tom's voice filled the courtroom, unusual in its clarity because he thought he was having a private conversation. Look, you're doing fine, he said to Sarah. The gullible provider's never going to see it coming. Just stick to the schedule we talked about. The footage showed them at the kitchen island, Tom's hands spread like he was explaining a construction project. Which, in a way, he was. The demolition of my life. Your Honor, I continued, I've provided documentation showing these recordings occurred during normal business hours, matching both my calendar and standard office schedules. The security measures Mr. Matthews characterized as paranoid were installed following standard industry protocols. I clicked through a series of calendar screenshots, each time stamped and notarized, showing the regular pattern of my workday. Every entry matched the footage timestamps perfectly. What they'd tried to paint as obsession revealed itself as simple documentation. The courtroom's murmur grew louder. A few heads turned towards Sarah, who'd gone still as stone, her hands clenched white in her lap. That pearl necklace didn't look quite so elegant anymore. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp behind those steel rims. Mr. Mercer, could you return to the first clip? I'd like to review the sequence after the addition to your drink. I rewound the footage. The timestamp reset to 7:42 p.m. This time, I let it play past the vial moment. The camera caught the glass switch I'd made while Sarah looked away, then her return. The casual sip she took from what she thought was my glass. Her quick exit followed, hand pressed to her mouth. Sometimes the clearest evidence is the thing you never have to explain out loud. Matthews stood, his tie slightly askew. Your Honor, I object to the introduction of this surveillance footage without proper... Mr. Matthews, the judge cut in. These exhibits were filed with the court last week, with full authentication documentation. I suggest you review those materials during our brief recess. She closed her notepad. I'll meet with counsel in chambers to address foundation and admissibility questions. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. The sharp rap of her gavel punctuated the silence. As she rose, bailiffs moved to their positions, and the low buzz of whispered conversations filled the courtroom. I sat down, letting out one long breath. Frank's hand touched my shoulder briefly. The quiet approval of a mentor who'd seen his student execute precisely as planned. I folded my hands on the table, feeling the slight tremor I'd held back finally release. The heavy door to the judge's chambers clicked shut, swallowing the courtroom's murmurs. All those dramatic words Matthews had spun about paranoia and control hung in the air like smoke with nowhere to go. In the row behind me, I heard someone whisper, "My God, she actually tried to—" They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't have to. The 15 minutes felt like an hour. You ever notice how time stretches when you're watching a door that holds your future behind it? I kept my hands flat on the table, focusing on the grain of the wood, instead of the whispers still floating around the courtroom. The bailiff's "all rise" cut through the murmurs like a knife. Judge Harrison swept back in, her face set in that particular expression judges get when they've made up their minds and don't much care who likes it. "Be seated," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Having reviewed the evidence presented, including the authenticated video footage and supporting documentation, this court finds compelling cause to dismiss the petition." She paused, looking directly at Sarah. "With prejudice." Those last two words landed like hammer blows. In legal speak, they meant Sarah couldn't try this again. Game over. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, given the nature of the evidence presented, this court is referring the matter to the district attorney's office for review." Her tone hardened. "The footage raises serious concerns about attempted poisoning and conspiracy that fall outside this court's immediate jurisdiction." I glanced over at Sarah. She was staring down at her legal pad, pen gripped so tight I thought it might snap. Funny how that pearl necklace she always wore to church, the one that used to draw admiring glances during coffee hour, now looked more like a collar. The whispers started up again, but different this time. These weren't the warm murmurs that used to follow us after Sunday service. These had edges. I caught fragments. "Can you believe she actually—" and "all this time, we thought—" The gavel came down one last time. "This matter is concluded." Out in the hallway, it was like standing in an echo chamber. Everyone had an opinion, a theory, a shocked observation they just had to share. News travels fast in our circles, and this wasn't just news. This was the kind of story people tell for years. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark, my business partner. "Still with you." I sent back a single period. Sometimes loyalty doesn't need words. Through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of Tom, Sarah's brother, trying to dodge reporters who'd already picked up the scent of a story. Funny how fast a man can disappear when the questions start getting uncomfortable. One minute he was there, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else, and the next, gone. Cameras turned my way. Microphones appeared like mushrooms after rain. Everyone wanted a statement, a quote, a reaction shot. I kept walking. Steady pace, eyes forward. Let them fill their columns with speculation. Sometimes, silence says more than any victory speech could. The sunlight outside hit me straight on. Bright, clean, honest. No dramatic shadows, no meaningful clouds. Just another Tuesday in October. Doing what Tuesdays do. My keys were heavy in my pocket. I ran my thumb over the ridges of my office key, the one that opened the door to everything I'd built, the one I'd almost lost to a signature on papers hidden in a purse. The weight of it reminded me what responsibility feels like. You know what's strange? Standing there on those courthouse steps, I didn't feel triumphant. Just clear. Like when you finally wipe a foggy mirror and see things exactly as they are. A reporter called out, "Mr. Mercer, do you have any comment on the judge's decision?" I kept walking. The office was waiting, and I had work to do. Real work. The kind that builds things instead of breaking them. Behind me, the courthouse doors kept swinging, letting out more people eager to spread the news. By sunset, every coffee shop and dinner table in town would be buzzing with their own version of what happened. That's how reputation works. It takes years to build, moments to break, and the breaking always draws a crowd. The next morning hit different. You know that feeling when you wake up and for a split second, you're not sure if yesterday really happened? That wasn't me. I knew exactly where I stood and what came next. Dawn was just breaking when I pulled into the empty parking lot. 20 years of showing up first had become such a habit. Even courthouse drama couldn't break it. The production floor was quiet. That special kind of quiet you get before machines wake up and people clock in. My footsteps echoed off concrete as I walked past idle equipment, each station waiting for its operator. You ever notice how familiar places feel new when your life shifts? I'd walked this floor thousands of times, but now every shadow looked sharper, every surface more defined, like someone had finally adjusted the focus on a full, blurry lens. At the far end, my office waited. The same glass walls I'd insisted on years ago, back when transparency wasn't just a buzzword but a promise to everyone who worked here. Sunlight was streaming through, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars. I unlocked the door, and there it was. Someone, Probably Linda from maintenance had gotten my message. Right in the middle of my desk sat a single crystal clear glass of water. Nothing fancy, just clean glass catching clean light. Behind it, my company ledger lay closed and waiting, its leather cover reflecting the morning sun. The same ledger Sarah's lawyer had tried to claim as evidence of my obsessive record-keeping. My keys made a soft click as I set them down next to the glass. 20 years of building, learning, adapting. All those keys represented something earned, not given. Each one opened a door that meant trust, responsibility, legacy. The phone in my pocket wouldn't stop buzzing. I pulled it out and scrolled through the notifications. Messages piled up like autumn leaves. So sorry we didn't see it sooner. From church friends. You've always had our confidence. From suppliers. Let's talk about expanding that contract. From clients who'd been sitting on the fence. The morning news sites were already running with it. Sarah's name was everywhere, but not like she'd planned. Local businesswoman faces poisoning investigation topped the regional coverage. The legal documents were public record now. Cold, hard facts laid out in black and white. The court clerk system showed the DA's office had already pulled the file. Word travels fast in a town our size. The country club where Sarah served on 3 committees had already accepted her resignation with immediate effect. The charity board she chaired sent out a press release distancing themselves faster than a teenager denying a bad date. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveways now pulled their curtains shut when cars passed. I muted the phone and set it face down. Sometimes silence is its own kind of answer. The chair made its familiar leather creak as I settled in. Everything was exactly where it belonged. The glass catching light, the ledger holding truth, the keys marking territory. I'd built this room as the heart of something honest, and here it stood, still beating. Through the glass walls, I could see the first employees arriving. Mary from accounting gave me a small nod as she passed, the kind of nod that says more than words could. The production floor hummed to life, machine by machine, voice by voice. The rhythm of real work, honest work, started flowing again. I reached out and touched the glass of water, feeling its cool surface against my fingertips. Clean, clear, nothing hidden, just like the truth. It might take time to surface, but it always finds its level. That glass sitting there was more than just water and silica. It was a marker, a reminder, a warning even. Trust is earned, never owed. You know what? Some people might have moved that glass, might have wanted a fresh start with no reminders, but I left it right there, catching the morning light. Because sometimes the best way forward is to keep the lesson where you can see it.